So just before we kind of step into the track, it'd be good just to get a bit of an insight into how Evil 9 came about as a duo.
So it was 15 years ago. I just moved to Brighton and was lacking inspiration, actually, to write music. And I was a producer. I've been producing things for 2 or 3 years. Tom had just come back from travelling around India.
I was DJing in local clubs around here, and I knew this lady, Emma, who turned out to be Pat's longtime partner, and she said, "Why didn't you do some tracks with Tom?" basically. And so we just started making tunes together, like no plan really, just make some tracks, basically. And it quickly happened in a space of a couple of weeks that we got together a small demo together, like 5-6 tracks, and we basically sent them out to lots of labels, but in our naivety, even at that time, we thought people were going to steal our tracks, so we recorded it onto tape, cassette tape, which nobody really did even then, you know. So I think most of the labels that got our cassette tape, they just chucked them in the bin, but we knew this girl who used to work for Marine Parade, who was called Jem, and she went on to write music for OC, and you know, she was a little pop star for a bit. And she said, "I think Adam might like this," so she played the cassette tape to Adam. And in a week, we got a phone call which said, "Is there an Evil 9 there?" And that was the start, really.
And that was within the first batch of releases, was it? So it didn't take long before kind of
literally
things picked up.
There was like 5 tracks on a cassette.
First 5 tracks we ever did, wasn't it? And,
yeah, and
we sent them. So we had like 3 labels we wanted to be signed to, and Marine Parade was the one we really, really loved, and they were the one that picked us, basically, which is great.
They're the only one that got back to us, which is perfect.
And that, yeah.
What was the kind of studio setup back in the day?
Just us and a computer and an old...
Was it Atari at first?
May have been an Atari and a Roland sampler, and that was it.
Wow.
Yeah. So we did all our demos were just on this Roland sampler and like an effects unit, maybe like a Digitech Studio Quad or something like that, I think, at the time. And then it wasn't until we wrote our album that we started using kind of, you know, proper DAWs and stuff to write music on. Everything was just on this tiny little Roland sampler screen. Basically.
Interesting. So years later, kind of before you started integrating your production workflow into like a DAW.
Yeah, it's been kind of interesting actually, because as really from when we started, the technology was just getting invented really. So like as we wrote our music, it kind of the music software grew with us, with our production techniques really. So we were kind of there for the beginning of all that.
Skip 15 years later or so, how has the setup changed? Obviously quite a lot, but what's the mainstays of what you use?
Ableton, obviously, and we have quite a lot of sort of 80s and 90s hardware synths and effects processors.
Just cheap ones, really.
Cheap ones mainly, yeah. We like the kind of things like kind of D50s and JD800s and DX7s, kind of the more quite digital ones as well. Actually, we really love, and it's just a mixture of both, really. We don't say, we don't go, oh, you have to do music just in software or just in hardware. We like to combine it all and use the best of both worlds.
How much do your productions generally revolve around kind of samples versus non-sample or more synth-led?
Up until our second album, we used just samples. Everything would be off vinyl, and we'd do it that way and try and be creative with it rather than just totally ripping off a sample and doing that. But then over time, we kind of added more synths, and then we've got very synthy again, actually. And then now we're getting a little bit more into kind of drum machine collections and things like that. And then all the drum sounds in this, other than the break, were put through a Ensoniq EPS sampler. So we all have them as collections with very kind of clean sounding drums on the computer, and then we're kind of bussing them out into the sampler, sampling into that, and then re-recording them just to give them a bit more weight and make them kind of heavier and crunchier, and they just sound nicer to me. So
I think that's why we kind of started using more synths as well, because the standard of the soft synths, when we first started, were pretty, rudimentary. And I think there wasn't a lot of texture and depth to the sound of them then. It was quite thin sounding soft synths, and we didn't really have enough money to buy nice synthesizers back then. And so now I think now we've got a bit more outboard, and also soft synths are sounding a lot better. I think that's maybe why we brought more synthesizers into the sound, you know. Whereas before we would have sampled the synth instead, and like, you know, off like Tangerine Dream or something like that, you know. And or something like that. Not that we ever sampled Tangerine Dream, but
it's just an example of something somebody might sample.
And in terms of skill sets, would you both say you're fairly rounded in terms of composition, you know, touching on compositional and technical aspects?
I think like composition-wise, we're, you know, an arrangement and all things like this, but I think Pat's skills with mixing down and synthesis is like far outweigh my skills, so I let Pat do those bits.
I think because I end up mixing it down and things like that, ideally, it would be like a bass drum and a snare and the odd sample, whereas Tom would like to put lots of things in. So we'll have that, but which is quite nice because it means that Tom will build up a loop, you know, say a 16-bar loop with lots in it, which can all be used elsewhere in the track. And then I quite often sort of tear that, you know, take it back down to like the kick and the snare or whatever, something like that, and then start adding things over time and building up the arrangement that way. So generally nothing's wasted, you know.
Cool. Well, yeah, let's dive into the track. It's probably a good time for it. What was the starting point for that?
The starting point was the breakbeat, which King of the Beats breakbeat, which we'd always loved. You might know it as the breakbeat from Snaps, I've Got the Power, which isn't as cool. Now I'm playing it. It sounds
Mantronics,
like most of the track.
I think we always loved that break, and we thought maybe we can do something a little bit different with it, you know, just kind of bring it into what we do kind of thing.
And is that the original sample untampered with, or have you chopped that up a little bit?
No, it's re-chopped. It's vaguely similar. Actually, it's quite similar, actually. But it is, yeah, it's been resequenced a bit.
I think if anybody knows our sound at all, they know that we're quite partial to cowbells, and so any breakbeat that's got a cowbell in it is kind of immediately appealing to us.
I mean, that's the most distinctive. I think that's the backbone of the track throughout it. It's that kind of melodic percussion all the way through. Yeah. So just on the drums, in terms of how they were created, obviously you've got the sampled element that makes up a big part of it. How did you then go about layering? Because obviously there's quite a few sections in the track where, you know, there's quite a few drums working in tandem together. Are they groups of samples? Have you built custom drum racks in?
Yeah, basically, as you can call it, to be honest, there's 4 sounds in a drum rack here, which is not a great deal, obviously, but it's kind of a mixture. So there's the main break, which is what we base the main rhythm on, and then samples we have in the drum rack are kind of there to reinforce it, just a heavier kick, and there's a kind of bigger clap in there to keep it, just to sort of bring up the fidelity a bit. And then the rest also, we have just samples in audio here as well of drums, just things like this kind of tambourine and other claps and other fills and an extra break. So I
think there was an interesting section just before the second drop where an additional break comes in.
Break, yeah.
I think it works really well.
I mean, basically just added it to, just add an extra rhythm to it, to be honest. It's quite unusual we put two full breaks on over the top of each other. I think in this instance, it just, added an extra layer and more energy for the end and more kind of skip to the track.
Cool. Well, let's move on to the bass. So there's like a pitch bent effect on it, which is probably, along with the cowbell, the most distinctive part of the track. Was that a fairly simple element in putting together?
It was, yeah. It was from an Alpha Juno 2 synth, which is an old synth that became very popular in the 90s with kind of sort of rave and hardcore and techno people. And they're kind of, £200, and lots of people will kind of, think they're rubbish because there's not like a proper analog synth, but they sound amazing and they make sounds that no one else, nothing else can do.
It's a very kind of fat drum and bass almost.
It is,
sound.
yeah. That's where it was kind of. It was why there's kind of re-spaces and it has. I'll play it and then it has kind of square waves over the top kind of thing.
Any effects added to that, or was it?
There wasn't. To be honest, it was recorded dry and through a desk and is sidechained. That's literally it on that.
Wow,
it just sounded enough as it was. I think sometimes you could push it and keep adding this and that. When if it sounds great coming from the synth, why change it? So.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to like the Reese sound,
That's often... exactly, yeah. We're a fan of the Reese, definitely. I think the thing about Junos is they just sound really fat, if you're looking for a bass or anything. So a lot of the times we use the Juno to underpin other things as well. So maybe we got some like a stab or a chord or something, and it just won't have the weight of like the outboard gear. So we'll just underpin it with like the same stab again from a Juno, and just gives it the kind of heaviness,
Let's move on to pads. So would they come after the bass, or?
Pads usually come quite a bit later, in the process, but also in the track. We bring them in quite a lot later. We're big fans of things like sort of 90s shoegaze bands, like kind of My Bloody Valentine and Ride and Slowdive. Those people who have those big kind of washes of sound, and then we try and do the synth equivalent of that. And we're quite big fans of, we've got a JD800 that does a lot of our pads. And like Tom was saying, it's always underpinned by a Juno 106, just to give it that bit more weight. Sometimes it can be really quiet, but it's just enough to push it.
And also I think a bit like, there's sort of like the overtones to old drum and bass, like Goldie, timeless era Goldie, and that sort of stuff, which we love as well. I think the drifting and pulsing sort of waves of sort of pads.
I think that's definitely the element kind of brings intelligence to the piece rather than kind of the brute force of the breaks.
I think we always want to take it to and bring in a little level of it that brings a bit of emotion to the track. Either way, kind of just makes you have a little bit more. I don't know. I guess as we get older, that's what we want to hear. A bit like some more texture and feelings.
Maybe worth. Bringing up the part where I think it's the second breakdown where the pads come in. is that 2-3 pad layers of
It's
pads?
on that is two layers. You can actually see one there actually because I think we recorded them both through the desk at the same time. But it's a really quiet Juno 106 with a JD 800 sat on top, basically. And there is one other pad in the track which rather unprofessionally I seem to have lost the parts for. So there is another one.
And kind of last element would be the vocals really helping to kind of, well, there's vocals and there's the aux stabs and, effects sprinkled here and there which kind of really help to gel it together. Were they kind of last in the process or?
I think it depends really. Sometimes, like maybe from the stabs, they were there from the start because, like the old kind of stabs on the one, like coming back to hip hop, really, there was always that on the one. And so, like, I don't know how to explain it more than that, really. But so I think maybe they existed from the start, kind of thing. But then I think as you're kind of coming to finish the track, we just want to see what we can add, what detail we can add. Because I think sometimes you have the track, and it's a great track, but it needs those little special moments to kind of lift it to the next level, I think, and I think that's when it starts becoming, that's when I start to love the track, I think, is when you just do just put stops in, even things like stops on the end of breaks and tiny little fills and interesting ways they come back into the beat and, just really not adding that much, but just taking away and just tweaking tiny little elements. Nothing too showy either for us, but just little special moments, like the odd little sample or just something to add,
I think as far as vocals go as well, it adds a bit of identity to it as well. It doesn't have to be a full vocal that's incredibly poetic and amazing and catchy, but also it just adds a human element to it, which sometimes we just put things like the odd a little breath or something like that, or a little chop, something that just helps it feel more human. I think this is a little bit more elaborate than that, but we can.
I think also that with a track, we are always looking for something that's slightly hooky. It could be anything, like a tiny melody here or there, or it doesn't even have to be so massive, but just something that you can lock onto about the track, or like some little moment in it, which is quite special. So. And
with things like that, again, are you kind of looking around randomly, sampling whatever works, really, or
we do that in this
sample
case?
Packs.
This was from a session we did with a friend of ours, and a vocal that never got used in a track, and we just used it and chopped it up and reversed some parts of it, and what else we did? Put it in Melodyne as well, and really extremely pitch shifted it, and just. Because we didn't really like what she said. I can't remember what it was now, but we didn't like it. But we liked the tone of it, so we just chopped it up and switched it all around, basically.
And how much of that is done kind of on the fly rather than at the end of the process?
It's a mixture of both. I think we both like to have the track sounding nice as we're working on it, just so you can get a vibe from it.
Do you mix on your master or by groups or...?
Our drums are always grouped. That's just something a friend of ours a long time ago, Damien Taylor, told us. Just, you've got to group your drums. And we hadn't even thought about, we did our whole first album, I think, without bussing everything. I don't think we even compressed the drum. Didn't even compress the drum bus. Do you even compress?
Then we discovered we love compression, so.
Yeah, but now it's the drums are always bussed. And if we have things like, we quite often would do things like, if we have a vocal, we do thanks to the magic of Ableton, we might sometimes put a pitch shifted version an octave lower, and then we'll bust those and put all the buses on top of that.
Also, use a lot of sidechain as well, like on a lot of things really, just so the whole mix sort of pulses, like sometimes quite subtly. So like the drum break is sidechain to the kick, and so obviously like you do. And also hats, we sidechain hats and synths and pads, everything, so they subtly pulse.
Probably too much. That sounds like a lot when you do that.
Not kind of like the Justice headbangery type, that kind of one. But
not necessarily really audible, but just enough to make everything breathe and move and fit better in the mix.
And how much would be Ableton within Ableton directly versus third-party plugs?
Certain ones we always go things like kind of really like the Ableton limiter. And then whatever have we got? Let me have a look first. Obviously, the drum rack is always there. Things like always, we use glue compressor for bus compression, not every time, but most of the time that's in there. And also, EQ is generally there all the time as well, so it's quite a good, and for sidechaining, I think the Ableton compressor is great, it works perfectly, and it's nice and easy to throw in and get it working quickly.
So not too much in the way of third-party plugs, you kind of find what you've got.
There are certain things like on here we've got like kind of waves, chroma tape, and there's the odd bit for effects, but it's nice to keep it as internal as much as possible.
Cool. We'll move it on to questions from you guys.
How much do you perform the track versus just assembling it in the timeline grid? Are you using controllers and as if you're live or not, or some of each?
With drums we do. A lot of the time when we're usually kind of banging out the drum beats in sound like a 90-year-old man banging out them drum beats. We like to kind of build them, especially now in Push, and there are various tools over time where we learn to play it, and all the synth parts we play, and then obviously into Ableton in MIDI, and then because we're not the greatest players in the world, we'll tighten it all up, which I'm sure most people are. I hope that makes sense.
You said you use EQ on the drum buses and things. Why would you use the EQ on the bus instead of the individual actual drum tracks?
We do both, basically. It's mainly it's on the tracks, but occasionally if we like the general sound of the drums, but we just want to brighten it a little, or add a bit of weight to it, or we'll just add that on the bus instead to give the whole thing a boost. And also I think sometimes it helps kind of glue it together if they've all got that similar frequency added like that, it can help out.
So you said you've been using a lot of breakbeats recently, but I was wondering from a sort of I sort of produced a lot of breakbeat, sort of hardcore influence stuff. What sort of signal chain do you use on the breakbeats? Do you keep them heavily processed, or do you sort of keep them pretty low and then layer them up with other beats?
They're usually layered. Like we were saying before with the single drum sounds, we quite often put the breaks through Ensoniq EPS sampler, which we got off eBay. It's like £70 or something like that. So I highly recommend. And it's the same thing. It just adds the crunch to it. Yeah, it's a sort of cliche, but it just does add that really nice kind of heavy crunch to it. And it kind of does most of the work, to be honest. That does so much of it. It sounds great, and it also sounds like, say, you're doing old hardcore influence stuff. That's it was all done on Akai's or EPS. They're done on those samplers, so it's you've instantly got the vibe there. And then also, we're usually kind of adding extra kicks or claps just to add a bit of weight to the break.
Is there a feature or a function or even a bit of hardware control that you wish you had, or that you think, it'd be really good if we could do that?
Or to put it another way, does Ableton have everything you need?
Yes. No, I think everything has its shortcomings. Ableton doesn't have many. That's why we use it. It's like, okay, I think we like things that are simple, basically. That's our main thing. Ableton to us is without going on about too much, is the simplest out of all the doors, basically. And that's kind of what appeals to us. I think it's a bit of a trap sometimes, wanting that extra thing, and it's not going to, you might kind of really want it, but it's not going to stop you from making music, So I think that's an answer.
I think also, we like things like MPCs as well as things that we could actually get to grips with our hands on. I think with the Push now, with Ableton and the Push, it kind of brings together all these things that we really needed. But it didn't really matter when we only had an Akai and and rudimentary setup, because we still make the best of what you got. And I think that's a lot of the time is just making the best of what you got with the limitations that you have, and But there's probably a lot of synths that we'd like to have. Really saying that. If there's anything we really wanted, it would be some nice outboard gear. So if anybody's listening, profit.
Give it up for Tom and Pat from Evil 9.